Everyone. So you just finished activity 1.1 on page 30. I'm going to go through the answers now quickly. So if you want to mark it, you can mark it. Figure 1A here in the bottom right, left-hand side, is going to be the canvas that the artist works on. Okay, the reason I say canvas and not easel is because 1C over here will be our easel. Okay, so here we've got canvas, 1A. Figure 1B is what we call a palette knife, P-A-L-E-T-T-E, palette knife. 1D will be a paint tube. Okay, so a paint tube. Figure 1E is a palette. So again, that word, P-A-L-E-T-T-E, palette. And we've got 1C, like I said already, is our easel. Okay, so 1A is canvas, 1B palette knife, 1C easel, 1D paint tube, and 1E is our palette. We are now going to look at the different kinds of paint. So the first one is tempera. So tempera is a very old kind of paint that gives us a matte finish. So it is when we take that powder paint and we mix it with egg yolks and a little bit of water to liquefy it. And then we put that onto the canvas. So it gives us that matte finish and it dries extremely, extremely quickly. So it's a bit difficult to get blending and brush strokes and those kinds of things right with tempera. If you want to try any of these painting techniques, you can pick up powder paint at any CNA or PNA and then just mix it with different things to try and experiment with those different kinds of mediums. The next thing is a fresco. So frescoes is paint that actually becomes part of your wall. So a fresco is your Renaissance paintings like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, your Ninja Turtle painters. Okay, they did a lot of fresco painting. So fresco painting is when it's painted on and the plaster is still wet. The plaster is that grey stuff that you put over the bricks when you are making a house to make the bricks smooth. If you've got any smooth walls in your house, they have plaster on them. So the artist would then work on that plaster while it was still wet and it acts like a sponge and all of that paint gets sucked into the wall and becomes part of the wall. But then again, we also get two different kinds of fresco. We get fresco secco, which is dry plaster. So that's just painting directly onto the wall with water and pigment. So that powder is actually just mixed with water and painted onto the wall. And it's not so durable, okay, especially with like our walls now have certain coatings and it'll just come straight off. The second one is the classic traditional Bon fresco, and that is painted onto wet plaster. So that's when the plaster acts like a sponge and absorbs those colors, and those colors end up lasting so much longer. Oil painting, something that everybody seems to lean towards when they are trying to learn how to paint. Okay, it is kind of your classic. When you think of your artists now that are painters, generally they do paint in oil. The carrier, so like we said, that what you're mixing your powder pigments into will be an oil-based liquid. Okay. So it is very slow drying, which means that it's nice because you can always go back and rework things, but it's also difficult because it's more difficult to layer upon. If you want to layer, then you need to wait for each layer to dry before you actually work on it. Otherwise, it's just going to blend with the layer below. So it has its positives and its negatives. Its viscosity, so how thick or thin it is, can be changed by adding either turpentine or we can add linseed oils to it. So it's a kind of oil, imagine like your sunflower oil, and then we mix that in to make it a bit thinner or to change the texture of the paint. When you are done painting and it's dry, you can also varnish it to make it look glossy. That's not always the best thing, but it is an option. Most of the paintings that we do end up studying in our visual culture studies are actually oils. The next thing is watercolors. So watercolors are a lot more difficult to work with. You have to prepare your paper. You have to make sure that you know certain techniques like bleeding, the way that they've blended on the edges here. But like I say, if you want to attempt it, there's tons and tons of YouTube videos that you can actually watch and tutorials that you can do to learn your medium. Okay, and the common support for this is paper. And usually when we work on this paper, we actually tape it down so that it doesn't warp and it doesn't actually change the straightness of our paper. Acrylic is a nice medium to work with. It dries quickly, it is cheap, it is inexpensive, it is synthetic paint, but it tends to dry quite flat. So if you're looking for that textured feeling, it's kind of your in between the smoothness of water paint and the roughness of oil paint. Okay, so this is your happy medium, and it dries fairly quickly. So if you want to be layering, it's a nice paint to actually work with. Okay, then we move into our more recent media. So these are things that have been introduced with technology, with the way the world's changing at the moment. The first one is collage. So collage, the way that we've done it up till this point, has been juvenile. It's been primary school. You create collages using magazines, and your pictures end up being mishmash. So if you do end up using collage in a final artwork, it needs to be done in a way that is a bit more tasteful and a bit better. So like this picture here, it actually has composition. It has been created in a way that's thoughtful. It's not just a whole bunch of pictures pasted together. Photo montage. This is a thing that actually has become more predominant with technology. So things like Photoshop use photo montage. It is when we take multiple pictures. So here we've got a picture of a road and a forest merged with a picture of a man with a helmet on. So a photo montage can be done manually, so actually physically cutting out pieces of paper and using different techniques to try and make see-through parts and things like that. Or we can do it on computer with Photoshop to actually create those images. Mixed media, a lot of people like to lean towards this because it's less restrictive than choosing drawing or painting and having being stuck with that. But again, it can start looking like a primary school project. So you've got to be very careful that you do it in a way that is tasteful and in a way that is well thought out. Photography. Okay, so this is a very fun one that you can actually attempt to try and play around with. Your coronavirus is going to be a great time for you to play around with photography on your phone. So looking at lighting, looking at composition, again, look at some tutorials and find different ways of doing things that are a bit more sophisticated than just taking photos. Okay, so now we can do activity 1.8. Might be a bit more difficult to actually do at home. You are going to make paper slippers. So there is a pattern on page 35 of your textbook. I'll also just attach a printable copy as well onto the description for this video. And you can create paper slippers. So you're going to print out the template onto cardboard or print it out and then paste it onto a cardboard box. And then you are going to create those paper slippers. Okay, and those paper slippers need to use the theme of who am I to decorate them. So also try to do them, like I've been saying, in a sophisticated way that is not so primary school. Try to sophisticate your stuff and make it a little bit better. Okay, and then we move into printmaking, which is a bit more fun. Okay, this is my favorite section. Okay, So printmaking is like stamping basically. So if you remember when you were in primary school, you would have done things like potato prints and cutting shapes out of potatoes, dipping them in paint and printing it. So those would be the very basics of your printmaking. Okay, our picture of the Great Wave, very out of focus, but this picture is actually done through printing. What is a print? So a print involves ink, paper, a plate, and a surface, such as wood, copper, on which to make the design. So it creates that stamp, okay? And then from that stamp, we're going to push it onto the paper and create an image. Okay, so we get different forms of prints. We get relief prints and we get intaglio prints. So a relief print, and we also get planographic. A relief print means that the work is in relief, which means that it sticks up. So everything that is black in this image, okay, so like this black part in the chameleon's mouth, the background, his eye, the pupil, okay, that is all still remaining, okay, which means I'm cutting into the white pieces. So everything that is white here is what is cut away, and everything that is black is what is left over. So that's a relief print. So there we've got woodcuts, wood engravings, and lino cuts that fall into this category. Intaglio print is the opposite way around. So we take a piece of metal and we scrape the black into that piece of metal. So everything that is black is what we scrape away, and everything that is white is what is left behind. So usually that is metal, and it's done as in the form of an etching. Okay, so it's a metal plate that is scraped into. I am going to also add some videos into the playlist that will also show you the different kinds of printing. Planographic is a one-time print. So instead of creating a stamp, we are going to create a one-time print. So the image gets painted onto the surface of a plate or limestone with greasy crayons, and then we put ink onto that, and that is then printed. So basically it's a one-time print. The medium of sculpture. Okay, so sculpture is when we start getting 3D. So it can be divided into two different things. We get freestanding sculpture and we get relief sculpture. High relief is like the one at the top here, so it's deeply carved, and low relief is just slightly raised. Okay, so freestanding is three-dimensional. You can see all the way around it. And then relief is like this, a 3D picture. Low relief, standing out slightly. High relief, standing out a lot. And then here we've got our three-dimensional sculptures. We get different ways that we can create sculptures. So either we carve, so carving can be done in stone, wood, ivory. Okay, if you want to experiment, you can take a block of soap and actually carve into that. Okay, so that would be your form of carving. Modeling is when we take a medium and we actually move it with our fingers or with tools, so like clay. So then you're actually creating. Instead of taking away, you are adding, you are building. And then lastly, casting. So casting is when we create a mold. And then from that mold, we pour into. So for example, they use a thing like wax, create their artwork, and then they pour bronze into it. And then the bronze fills up that mold. Okay, again, I will attach videos into the playlist to actually show you these different techniques.